Good afternoon, folks. My name's Alex Stanhope, and this is a short presentation about purchasing decisions. So purchasing, key to IT strategy, often organizations need to buy new productivity suites such as Microsoft Office 365, or new websites, new databases, new HR systems. All these things have in common that they're major IT purchases. Often talked about at this time of year, what with being Christmas and January sales and so on, but IT purchasing or technology purchasing really affects all of us. Common to all of those purchasing decisions are vendors. IT vendors are a fairly mixed bag. In the main, a lot of integrity, some very good products. However, there can be a real vendor push, and this presentation is really looking at how we can understand that vendor push and make the most out of it rather than being shepherded into a solution that perhaps isn't quite right for our organization. So a lot of vendor hype, very dangerous being vendor-led because there might be some omissions from those wonderfully glossy sales presentations that actually we discover later on which can create problems. New is wonderful, euphoria, that great feeling of the new things. The problem with euphoria is that new often caters to a set of problems that we had in the past. It's not necessarily a guarantee that it will be a good solution to the problems we're going to have in the future. So we need to temper that euphoria with a recognition of the world that we're going to be working in, and so on. We're going to be very reliant on the improvements and upgrades that come with this larger system that we're putting in place, and understanding what that cycle is going to look like. There are downsides to the new, not least of all, there will be bugs that will need solving and problems that we don't yet know about, complications as yet undiscovered. Then the inevitable thing with any new system is that as we try to taper it to the organization to make it well-fitting, there will be a discontinuity, and the vendor's commitment to managing that discontinuity is going to be crucial to ensuring that we get the most out of this technology. Vendor pressures. A vendor will often pressure you towards buying from them right now, and in such a way that you continue to buy from them in the future. These are natural vendor tendencies, I think, because often vendors are very sales-led. But when you're listening to a sales pitch, I'd like to present a set of counter strategies, things that you could look for that could be a mechanism for managing that vendor push and really questioning whether it's going to help you deliver your goals. Goals are crucial to this. If you can't easily articulate why it is that you're going through this purchasing process, whether it's buying something small like a mouse or a piece of hardware, or something big like a brand new set of productivity licenses for all your team, then without a clear understanding of those goals, it's going to be very difficult to get to a yes-no decision when it comes to actually deciding whether to buy or not. Think about how is the organization organized and how it's going to meet this technology. What is it you're trying to achieve? How is this tech going to help with that, and what's it going to cost? And critically, how long is it going to take to deliver the value that ultimately this technology or system promises? Counter strategies. So rather than purchasing a great big system, is there a way to break it up into smaller services or smaller components? Finer service granularity gives us a better chance of changing out different components as new innovations and system evolution goes on. It may be that while the whole solution is the greatest and best thing ever right now, in as little as 6 months' time or a year's time, it could be that there are new components for little parts of that maybe you want to adopt. Your ability to adopt those will also depend on the granularity or standardization that exists within your system. Think about service lifecycle. How long is it that this system is going to be in place for? How long will you need to rely on it? And if you are going to rely on it for several years, how are you going to cope with the change that will come in that period of time? Dynamic changes within your marketplace, within your organization, but also within the software itself, the software or hardware, the system that's being put in place. How are you going to manage staff training to ensure that when this system lands, it's not landing cold on people's desktops, but instead is being met with a healthy understanding? The messaging that goes with this can often be as important, if not more important, than the nuts and bolts of the system itself. Is there a trial phase that's in place? How are you going to deprecate the old system? All these things come into play, not least of all when costing up the new system, because it's possible to amortize even a high capital cost at the start over the length of service for the system. Critically, think about when purchasing a system, what its end of life is going to look like, and actually costing up the new system, the replacement for this one that you're buying now, ahead of time. Preserve access to data. If this system is a well-connected set of components and all those components speak to each other through well-defined APIs or interfaces, and the data they're exchanging is all standards-based, then it will be a doddle to replace different components as new innovations come in. If, on the other hand, they're proprietary standards or you don't have access to that data, then there's a real risk that there'll be a migration process, and that migration process can be inconvenient or downright impossible, depending on exactly how you've been set up. So think about data, because your access to data will almost certainly be the key influencing factor that determines how you can change the system in the future. Invest in the glue. If a system is made up of many parts, then actually the bits that hold it together are crucial. The chances are, if the system needs to be run resiliently, you'll have to think about disaster recovery. If it needs to be run in such a way that you can test new updates, then you'll probably have a testing environment. If you're going to be developing new integrations with it as you go through, then there'll be development environments, perhaps many of all these things. And each one of those environments will need to be very similar. Invest in your ability to set up the environments and test reliably within them, because that will give you the assurance that the system is going to carry on behaving and performing as it is now. And that's going to be crucial to the long-term value proposition that you're probably weighing up in deciding whether to buy it or not. Manage it with code. So in the past, we used to have to manage these things with a lot of discipline and real care in the documentation to ensure that we could reliably put the system back together when, for whatever reason, we needed to. New bits, old bits not working, that sort of stuff. But increasingly now, the complexity has risen so much, it's better to define that stuff as code that can be managed with all of the software development disciplines that have been so successful in the application space. See previous screencasts. Seasonal purchasing. So your vendor will probably have some kind of year end, and around that year end, there's a great opportunity to negotiate with them about the cost of this new system you're putting in place. But to do that, you've got to set yourself up with a runway, and that means planning ahead. It means getting approval from that budget stakeholder or stakeholders or the board really in advance, and then working backwards from your vendor's year end to be certain that you can actually put in place the purchasing decision with the vendor at the time when they're going to be most likely to do you the best deal. So that might mean 6 months out thinking about some kind of plan, a trial phase 4 months out, training new staff 3 months out, and ultimately landing this when you agree with the vendor, hopefully what will be a great price. Hope and not hype. Gartner did this fantastic graph to show the hype cycle. It talks about how when new technology emerges, we tend to overinflate the aspiration for the technology. We tend to think that it's going to be the next greatest thing. And sometimes it is. But often we go through a trough of disillusionment where it turns out that actually the software has a whole load of issues and the system works broadly very well, but there are complexities and workarounds and things that make it harder. And so we tend to be slightly disillusioned in it. Then eventually technologies crawl out of that space and they start to become mainstream. So this has happened to all kinds of things. Cloud computing, of course, now is well on the far side of the hype cycle, and people are starting to get real value from it. But as little as perhaps 18 months ago, 2 years ago, it was still somewhere down this end. And as a result, there are a lot of companies that spend a lot of money investing in migrations to the cloud that didn't return a lot. So the question really comes down to, where is your organization? Where do you want to place yourself on the hype cycle? If you want to be taking on technologies when they're exciting and hyped and being pushed very heavily, then that's great. But there's often a great cost to that. It's expensive to be at the cutting edge. Similarly, if you want to wait and actually only take these technologies on when they've become very mainstream, then it can be less expensive, but there is a fear of being left behind, and there are some perhaps upgrades or features that you want in the new system that aren't accessible until you take on this new tech. So it's a balancing act, and one determined not really by a board strategically, but instead by a culture that lives inside the organization. How ready are you to take on this kind of test and learn cycle that's so important in order to get the most out of it? And equally, do you have the budget for it? Digital culture, it's a huge part of this. Building it in an organization, I don't think can be done directively. It has to be done collaboratively. So if you want your organization to be more progressive, ready to adopt new technologies and to take on new systems, that requires a very regular investment, not only in the technologies themselves and giving people earlier access to them, but also in continuous professional development and staff training. If people feel comfortable with the new technology because every single migration program and every single rollout yields new, well-tested software that does a great job and makes life easier, then there'll be a faith, there'll be a goodwill that comes from the team, and that goodwill can be fantastic for making these things land and land well. Finally, if I can offer any help with this, please get in touch. If you're looking at a digital strategy, or you're thinking about purchasing decisions and trying to do due diligence on a number of suppliers, or if you just like help with the nuts and bolts of actually writing infrastructure as code or training your operations team to take on new techniques such as DevOps, then it's something Litena can help with, and please get in touch. Thanks very much.